Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all the places at Hawk Blogger. And it's a Thursday morning here before the Super Bowl. And yeah, we just had a great Real Hawk Talk last night, the triumphant return of Evan Hill. And Jeff Simmons, and I got to chop it up last night. So make sure you check out Real Hawk Talk wherever you get your podcasts or up here on YouTube. And also, for folks that are always kind of curious, you can get Hawk Blogger Mornings podcast as well. It is a separate podcast feed, but just look for HB Mornings. You can find it on Spotify. I think you might be able to find it on Google Podcast as well. I'm not positive, but the best place to find it is patreon.com/hawkblogger. And if you sign up there, you get a little private link that lets you add it to wherever you want to get your podcasts. So all you got to do is be a Patreon member to get access to that. And even if you're not, you go to Spotify, a lot of the episodes are available for free for the public. So make sure you check it out where you get your podcasts. So we continue day 318 of this little experiment we call Hawk Blogger Mornings. 318 straight days of fresh Seahawks content, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And the thing that kind of was on my mind today and has been on my mind throughout this, like really the second half of the Seahawks season, is how big of a priority should the edge rush be? As you attack this offseason, how big of a priority should the edge rush be? On the surface, you've got two young edge rushers in Boye Mafe and Derick Hall, and you've got a still young edge rusher in Uchenna Nwosu. You could even throw into that Draymond Jones, who was an edge rusher, and we'll talk about him when I get into some numbers here in a second. So how much room is there even to add to that room? How much of a priority should it be? I'm going to dive into some numbers. We'll talk about it coming up here in just a bit. And before we do that, I want to go through a few bits of little information related to the Seahawks or NFC West news of the day. So let's kick it off with that. First things first, if you didn't see on my feed this morning, Jason from Over the Cap put out this morning that the Seahawks have renegotiated the contract of Leonard Williams. And in doing so, they have opened up $14.5 million in cap space. Now, the Seahawks are still over the cap. This doesn't solve all their cap woes, but this is just one of a number of moves that they can make to clear cap space. And in doing this, what they did is they restructured his deal so that they converted $18.745 million of his salary to a signing bonus and added 2 void years to the contract. That dropped his cap number this year from 29 to 14. Now, I won't go into all the details of this, but for people that are at least a little curious how teams do this, why teams do this, is when you convert salary to a bonus, to a signing bonus, what happens is the player gets all that money that was maybe going to be paid out on an annualized basis in salary. They get whatever they decided as a restructure. They get it all right away. So the players are like, sure, yeah, I'll take that. The reason it lowers the cap hit is because the way signing bonuses work is that the cap hit for a signing bonus is different than salary. It is amortized across the years of the contract. So this is why they add what are called void years, because void years, they're really not years of the contract, but they're kind of dummy years is the way I would think about it, that you can take that signing bonus and spread it out from a cap perspective over more years. So when you add another couple years, you are adding to the amount of years that you're dividing that signing bonus by, thereby shrinking the cap hit in each of those years. That's why they did something like this. That's how it works. And, you know, this is why restructures are interesting for teams. When you've got void years involved, that can be a problem because you are paying money on your cap for a player that may not be on your team anymore. may not be playing in the league anymore. It's just the way that it works that you have to spread that you basically are pushing it into the future. Generally, that tends to be a good bet. It used to be a much more risky thing to do. But with the way that the cap has been escalating for now a number of years, teams have been able to utilize void years to push what is, a larger percent of the cap now into the future, where the cap numbers going up. And now you have maybe a percentage of the contract you sign this year into the future, and the cap goes up enough that it actually ends up working out that you're spending a smaller percent of the total cap across those years on your players. So it's some people are interested in this stuff. Some people are like, oh my God, get me through it. But I just wanted to let people know at least a little bit about how that works. And it still leaves the Seahawks with about $14 million that they've got to clear to get under the cap. They will do that. I'm not worried about it. I don't think it's a big deal. Other bit of news is that our little NFC West brethren, the Los Angeles Rams, already had talked about trading Cooper Kupp, and that seems to be in process. I don't exactly understand why people are trading for him and what they would trade for him, but fine. It's like, are people going to trade for Tyler Lockett? I don't know. I think of Cooper Kupp and Tyler Lockett as somewhat equivalent players at equivalent parts of their career. In any event, the new news is that Albert Breer and a few other folks have started to pass the rumor around of, why is nobody talking about trading for Matt Stafford? So this has come just about basically a few days after Matt Stafford confirmed that he wants to continue to play. And it also comes after a midseason moment where, if people remember, before the trade deadline, the Rams were talking about trading Cooper Kupp. The Rams were talking about trading Matt Stafford. They ended up not doing it, and then almost got to the NFC Championship. So it is an interesting moment for the Rams, because the way their roster construction is built right now, they've got a very young team, especially on defense. And they're about to get younger when they trade Cooper Kupp. And Matt Stafford is the only part of that roster that doesn't really make sense from a timing perspective, from a time horizon perspective. And so it is logical for the Rams to be saying, all right, we want to get younger at that position, because right now it feels like Stafford retiring or leaving is going to have a cratering effect on that team's fortunes. So if you're trying to build for a championship team over the next 3 years, 3-year windows is usually how teams plan. The likelihood that Matt Stafford's going to be around the next 3 years and still be part of what you want to do is pretty low. So it's an interesting kind of paradox for the Rams, because if they move on from Matt Stafford, they're going to have a hard time contending. Maybe they believe they can, sign a Jimmy Garoppolo back and be just fine with him, or good enough, and maybe that'll be a bridge quarterback, and maybe they'll make a move for a younger quarterback and develop that player. I don't think they think Stetson Bennett is their guy. But if they keep Matt Stafford and play him, then they have to feel like they can contend in the NFC based off of how this year went. So if you move on from him, you're most likely making your team worse in the short term. But you're also, if you hold on to him, you may be making your team worse in the long term or in the medium term. So it seems like the Rams may be prioritizing the medium term over the short term. And personally, if I was a Rams fan, I would want that. I would think that was right. Kelly Stafford, his wife, has gone on her podcast talking about, like, Matt's at the end of his career. He wants to win. And if he's not valued here, then we're happy to move. She was pretty bold about her statements there. She also went on to talk about how she thinks the news of them shopping Cooper Kupp is odd, and that from her perspective, they were one play away from the NFC Championship, and if they made it to the NFC Championship, she thinks that they would have won it and they'd be in the Super Bowl, and so it's crazy to be moving on from the key guys that helped you get there. So interesting news in the NFC West that we'll kind of keep an eye on as things go on. And this relates a little bit to the conversation I had with Evan and Jeff last night, where I made a pretty full-throated case for the Seahawks making a trade for Joe Milton. That's where I'm at. I don't know if I'm going to get moved off that spot. I think that that's the move for the Seahawks to make that gives them the most upside with the lowest downside, with lowest cost to do and highest potential return on that low cost. And I like him better than any of the quarterbacks I've been looking at that the Seahawks could realistically get in this draft. And you're not going to have to spend much to do it. I like him. I think it's more interesting than Justin Fields. I know people say go get Justin Fields. I've seen enough of Justin Fields to know what his ceiling probably is. I don't think I've seen that yet from Joe Milton. And it could be lower. I'm admitting he could be way worse than Justin Fields. I don't know yet. But the reason I bring this up is the Rams are another team that could very realistically make that move. And for folks that are saying, hey, that's just one game he played, relax. I guarantee you that every single NFL team that's looking at quarterbacks has the same question in their mind that I do. They're looking hard at Joe Milton. 100%. If you don't think they are, if you think it's crazy, I'm here to tell you you're wrong, because that's how quarterback starved this league is. And they're watching every single thing. And he put things on film in there that were Cam Newton-esque. And that's not something that matters about who you're playing at that point. If you have an edge rusher literally bounce off of you, that's not about level of play. That is just who you are as an athlete. And if you can make some of the throws that he made in that game, Jalen Milroe couldn't make those plays against air. He could not. He couldn't come close. So with that in mind, there are going to be teams. They're going to say, well, because it's only one game, we can probably get him for cheaper. If he had done that for 6 games or 3 games, you probably can't get him for maybe unless you get a first-round pick. So the fact that it's only one game means he's going to be more appealing because it's going to be a lower bar to entry. And if the Rams go out there and they get a Joe Milton and he ends up being as good as he looks like he could be, shame on the Seahawks, man. Like, so that's what I'm saying is, like, be careful. Be careful about saying you don't want to risk something like Joe Milton, because my guess is he's going to be on some other team next year. And maybe it turns out that you're like, man, he sucks. Sure, that's totally possible. It's maybe even likely. But if he ends up on the Rams and he's part of that young crew and you have to play against him for a decade plus and he ends up being very good under Sean McVay, that's a nightmare scenario, guys. So just be careful. Be careful out there, folks. We're in a delicate, this is the MacGyver McGruber off season, right? Either they manage it well and they make the right choices and they diffuse the ticking time bomb, or it's a calamity. One of the two. That's how this offseason is going to go. And what they do at the quarterback position is a key part of that evaluation. So with that, let's get into the topic of the day. Mike McDonald talks about chasing edges. So why not talk about chasing edge rushers in our episode today, looking at what to do with this Seahawks edge rush group. And let's talk about who's in that group right now. I was kind of going through and trying to figure out, like, what's the what's the positional priority for these different groups for the Seahawks? I was kind of going through and trying to figure that out. And, it's a little bit hard to assess because there's two guys that you don't exactly know what's going to happen. There's two guys in Derick Hall and Boye Mafe. They're on the team. You don't have question about it. And in terms of age, Boye Mafe is 26 years old. Derick Hall is 23 years old. Okay, so a little bit younger, but still two young edge rushers. Boye Mafe is going to be going into his third season. Is that right? Yes. No. He'll be going into his fourth season. Excuse me. He'll be going into his fourth season, and Derick Hall will be going into his third season. All right. So Boye Mafe is entering the final year of his rookie contract. Derick Hall still has another year on his rookie contract. So those guys are going to be around unless something, unforeseen happens. And then you've got two other guys. Dre'Mont Jones, who you signed to a big free agent deal and who, was signed to be an interior player, but in Mike Macdonald's defense, they asked him to cut weight and play outside linebacker, which he did. And the reality is there was mixed results. Some people say it was bad. I'm going to show you some numbers, talk you through some numbers in a second that may at least alter your perspective on that. But in any event, he also played inside this year a little bit. But the problem with Dre'Mont Jones, besides the fact that production is not elite, it's not matching the contract, is that he's got a $25 million cap hit this year. And if you were to cut him, you would save $11.5 million in cap. So he is absolutely a guy that they could be looking at making a move cap-wise. They could restructure him. That would be a move that would essentially kind of guarantee he's going to be around, because you don't do that unless you're going to keep the guy. And then the fourth guy that you've got in this mix is Uchenna Nwosu. And Uchenna Nwosu is another player who was injured for most of last year. He had the torn pec, came back from that, was fully healthy through training camp, through preseason. The final preseason game, he gets what he calls a cheap shot from Wyatt Teller from Cleveland, ends up injuring his MCL, and he's out for a lot of the season. And so a lot of fans are like, oh man, this guy's injured all the time. I don't get it. I don't get it. I won't go on a huge rant about this, but Uchenna Nwosu is not injury prone. Having someone dive at your knee and your knee buckle does not make you injury prone. And the only other injury he had was a torn pec, which a lot of guys go through, and it's not a chronic injury to have a torn pec. He rehabbed and he was fine. He looked great throughout camp. So I don't have this hang up about his health. That is what a lot of fans seem to have about him, but I don't. I think the question with Uchenna Nwosu is, again, production for what you're paying for. He is going to be fifth at this point on the team in cap number. He has a $21 million cap hit this year. If you were to cut him, you would save $8 million. And there is a date coming up here in the next week or so. It might even be in the next couple days. I think it might be February 8th, where some of his salary would become guaranteed. And maybe the Seahawks do some restructuring with him. I don't think they're looking to move on from Uchenna Nwosu. I think he's going to be around. I think Dre'Mont Jones is a much bigger question mark, and I think the odds are slightly toward that he won't be back. Slightly, because I don't think he's a perfect fit for the Seahawks, for Mike Macdonald's defense. He's in the tweener category that Mike Macdonald just doesn't generally employ. He doesn't really fit as an outside linebacker. He also doesn't really fit as a defensive tackle or defensive end for this group where he wants people over 300 pounds. So I think there's a little bit better chance that he won't be around. But here's the thing. None of these guys have really separated themselves in terms of being a elite edge rusher. All of these guys so far have been the Robin. None of them have been the Batman. And you don't necessarily have to have an elite edge rusher to be a Super Bowl contending team. But if you look at it, certainly helps. I'll just leave it at that. It certainly helps. And if you look at what the Rams got from Jared Verse this year, if you look at what the 49ers have gotten in past years from Nick Bosa, it doesn't necessarily have to be more than one. Having one can be all the difference. Like having one alpha edge rusher is absolutely more valuable than having two, beta. It's probably the wrong term nowadays, but two secondary edge rushers. And as I kind of went through their numbers this year, a couple things kind of jumped out to me. So first thing I'm going to do is I'll talk through what happened across this season, because I don't know if you guys noticed, but for me, the edge rush seemed to disappear. It started off pretty strong where Boye Mafe and Derick Hall were really making an impact every single game. And it seemed to just kind of poof, evaporate. And I went through and did a little bit of investigation on that. And if you look at the first 9 weeks of this season, I picked that just a bye week break, the kind of split. I also picked that because there were some changes made to the way Mike Macdonald was running his defense right around the bye week, where they started playing a little bit more of these bear fronts, a little bit more of these condensed formations to help slow down opposing run game. And I think there might have been a secondary, like a less understood implication of that move. Not sure it's all about that, but I think there might be something where I think there was a little bit less wide alignment for the edge rushers. And I think that might have had a negative impact on their numbers. So what do I mean? What am I getting at here? So first 9 weeks of the season, you had Boye Mafe with a 9.1% win rate, pass rush win rate. Draymond Jones actually was the best, 10.5% win rate for those first 9 games. Derick Hall was at 8.3. Okay, so 10.5 Draymond Jones, 9.1 Boye Mafe, 8.3 Derick Hall. For the last 8 games, you had an actual improvement in the win rate. So, like from a win rate perspective, I was incorrect. Draymond Jones went from 10.5 to 15.7, which is interesting. Boye Mafe went from 10.1 to 12.8, so an improvement there. Derick Hall went from 8.3 to 8.7. So my instincts, at least from a win rate perspective, were wrong. I'm always going to tell you exactly what I find, not what makes me look the best. But that was kind of my impression. If you look a little bit further, though, the pressures actually drop and the pass rush effectiveness dropped. So what you had was 27 pressures for Boye Mafe in the first 7 games. He only had 20 pressures in the final 8. So he had more pressures in one fewer game in the first part of the season. Derick Hall went from 26 pressures to 19 pressures. So his pressure rate also dropped. Draymond Jones went from 25 to 20. So the overall pressures did start to drop. Now, Uchenna Nwosu came into the mix, so that was part of it. If we talk about actual pass rush snaps, that was also part of it. But even if you look at their pass rush grades for what that's worth, if you look at true pass sets, and I know Ray Roberts hates this, but true pass sets basically say take out screen passes, take out RPOs, take out these kind of plays that really you're not really rushing the passer. It's not a normal pass set. Look at true dropbacks. And so I think it's a good number to me to look at. And Derick Hall had a 78.2 grade in true pass sets in the first half of the season. He dropped down to 65 in the second half. Boye Mafe, 77.3, almost the same grade as Derick Hall. He dropped down to 68.7. So there's a little bit of conflicting data here about, did the edge rush really drop off in the second half of the season? For my money, it did. If you want to look at pure sacks, the Seahawks from their edge rushers had 11 sacks in the first 9 games. They had 7 sacks in the last 8. So 11-7 in one fewer game. So why do I bring all this stuff up? I was pretty bullish on what the Seahawks had in terms of Boye Mafe and Derick Hall. And I think what we saw was that they really were not guys that could take over a game week in, week out. Early on, Boye Mafe looked like he might be ascending to be one of those guys. And I don't know if it's injury. I don't know if it's the way teams were playing him. I don't know if it was the adjustment to the scheme. But he fell back. And if you kind of compare year over year for Boye Mafe, it was a step forward in terms of pressures per snap. Boye Mafe, not really a big step forward, is essentially the same. So in 2023, Boye Mafe had 443 pass rush snaps. He had 58 pressures. Okay, so that works out to a 13.1% pressure per snap rate. Okay, 13.1. This year, he had 344 pass rush snaps. So he had fewer pass rush snaps, almost 100 fewer. Almost 100 fewer. He had 47 pressures instead of 58, but his pressure per snap was 13.7. So he goes from 13.1 to 13.7. He dropped in terms of his sack per snap. He had 9 sacks the previous year. He had 6 this year. Sacks are kind of they're a little bit of randomness worked into sacks. And so that's why most analysts look at pressure rate. It's a little bit more sustainable and projectable and predictable year over year. And sacks usually will come. That pressure rate, or that pressure per snap rate of 13.7 is the highest among all the Seahawks edge rushers. Derick Hall jumped up from 8% pressure per snap to 12.2 last year. He went from 11 pressures in 2023 to 45 pressures in 2024. So obviously he made the biggest step forward of everybody. Dre'Mont Jones, for what it's worth, has a 12% pressure per snap. He's right around Derick Hall. He had 45 pressures this year, which was the same amount as Derick Hall. So if you love Derick Hall and you feel like he was creating a lot of pressure and you hated Dre'Mont Jones because you didn't think he was, your eyes might be deceiving you. And then you've got Uchenna Nwosu, who in 2023, he only had 163 pass rush snaps in 2023, he had 111 this past year. He had a 8.6% pressure rate in 2023. He had a 9% pressure rate this year. To give you some idea, Trey Hendrickson, 83 pressures this year, 16% pressure rate. Myles Garrett, who's now wanting to be traded, 83 pressures, 17.4% pressure per snap rate. Jared Verse, 77 pressures in his rookie season, 15.9% pressure per snap. And then Nick Bosa, 69 pressures, 16.4% pressures per snap. So the elite of the elite in terms of edge rushers are over 15%, basically 16% or higher. And the best the Seahawks have to offer right now is Boye Mafe at 13.7. So it's not crazy. It's not like way, way, way off. But the Seahawks, Derick Hall ranked 34th in the NFL. Boye Mafe ranked 31st in pressures for edge players this year. I don't know if that's good enough. And the issue with the Mike Macdonald aspect of this is it's not clear whether Mike Macdonald will prioritize edge rush over interior, because the other thing that's a factor here is while the edge rush might have dried up a little bit in the second half of the season, what stepped forward? Leonard Williams stepped forward. Jarran Reed stepped forward. The interior rush really blossomed. And so I don't think it matters where you get your pass rush from, but I still would say that Seahawks did not have a consistent enough pass rush throughout this season. They ended up having reasonably good numbers in that regard. And let me pull up, at least I like to look at the NFL's numbers for pressure rate. They had been a top 5 pressure rate team for most of the year. And I think that they ended up much lower. They ended up at 6. 36% pressure rate. Only 5 teams were ahead of them. So maybe this is, a mountain out of a molehill. If you look at sacks, the Seahawks were 10th in the NFL. Really, were tied for 8th in the NFL in sacks with 45. So they put sacks up there as well. But sometimes numbers can be deceiving. I mean, the Rams were 21st in the NFL in sacks, and they were, where were they? Wow, how far down were they? They were 10th in the NFL in pressure rate. The Rams had one of the better pass rush teams in the playoffs. Pretty effective pass rush team in the playoffs. So I think one of the pieces here that I'm still grappling with, and that's part of why I wanted to spend the show talking about this with all of you, is I don't think you can make the case that Boye Mafe and Derick Hall have peaked. I think they still have room to grow. I also don't think you can make the case that Uchenna Nwosu is no longer a good player or valuable to the team. I don't believe that to be the case either. I don't know that I ever thought Uchenna Nwosu was an elite edge rusher or had that as a ceiling. He just is a very good all-around edge player and a leader. And if you have 3 guys that you plan on keeping on your team, you pretty much don't have room for another. That's the reality. So I think what kind of one conclusion I would come to here is if Boye Mafe and Derick Hall and Uchenna Nwosu are on your team, on your roster next year, it's going to be hard to prioritize drafting an edge rusher in the early rounds. Maybe you take a flyer later, but I think it becomes harder to say, a guy that I am pretty enamored with, a guy that you heard Dane Brugler say, man, if he's available to you, you take him at 18, is Shamar Stewart. Dane Brugler, I think Dane Brugler's actually, we should pull this up. We could talk about that on the show. It should be available. His top 50. Yes. No. It's not yet available. Sorry. I think that he said Shamar Stewart was going to be number 5 for him. on his big board, which I buy. I think he's that talented. But if you get a Shamar Stewart, what did you do? If you get a Mykel Williams, if you get a Mike Green, for 3 names to add to the list, who's the odd man out? Do you cut Uchenna Nwosu? Maybe. Do you start one of those guys over one of your guys like Mafe or Hall? Maybe. Do you not sign Boye Mafe to an extension? Maybe. I don't know if any of those feel great to me. I think the most realistic would be that a guy like Shamar Stewart rotates in, and if he earns his spot, he gets snaps, and you figure out where you are next year, and then maybe next year, Uchenna Nwosu is not part of your team. That could be a possibility. And maybe Shamar Stewart in small increments is good enough that he earns more snaps and he impacts games. But this is one of the most complicated roster aspects of the Seahawks, or maybe it's the simplest. Maybe the Seahawks are like, we're good. We've got 2 young edge rushers. We've spent 2 second-round picks in the last 3 drafts. We like how they're developing. Mike Macdonald's already said that they have all-pro ceilings. I asked him, how good can these guys be? He said all-pro. So they like the guys. Maybe it's just that simple. And maybe that means if a dynamic edge rusher falls to them, they'll be like, thanks, but no thanks. But here's what makes me uncomfortable with that situation. They have not been able to consistently affect offenses with edge rush for years. And I think that's a problem in today's NFL. So that's where I keep coming back and forth on this. And there's a couple guys, if we want to add some names to the list that we haven't talked as much about, who I believe are interesting players. I don't know if they're going to be fits for the Seahawks. Certainly not in the first round, but could be later. If I told you across all of FBS and FCS, who is the highest graded edge rusher that had enough snaps to qualify, so none of these onesie-twosie guys, who is the highest graded pass rusher in true pass sets? It's not Abdul Carter. He was number 3. But I think that gives some credence to the fact that this isn't meaningless. Like he's potentially the best player in this draft. It wasn't Mike Green. Mike Green was 21st, which is good. I mean, this is out of like thousands of players, or 1,000 players probably, across all these schools. Actually, it's across roughly 600 players, I should say. 800 players. Let me keep working on my math. So 21st out of 800 is not bad. It's not, who's another name that's been around a lot that we've talked about? It's not, let's see, Jack Sawyer. It's not Jack Sawyer. He's 66th on this list. Number 1 graded player in true pass sets, number 1 edge player is Josiah Stewart of University of Michigan. Number 2 graded player, David Walker of Central Arkansas. Those 2 names are 2 names that folks should become a little bit more familiar with. David Walker, in particular, for me, is an interesting mid-round player for the Seahawks. He is 6'2", 260 pounds. In other words, right in the sweet spot for what Mike Macdonald looks for from his outside linebackers. He also had the most pressures of any player in the Senior Bowl. He had 7 pressures in the Senior Bowl game. And this is a guy, comes from a small school, Central Arkansas. He, in Senior Bowl, showed up He was a quality rusher in 1v1s. He wasn't so dominant that you're going to say, "Oh my gosh, this guy has got to be a first round pick." But I think he very well could have earned himself a day 2 selection. He could be a 3rd round pick. It's possible somebody could talk themselves into a 2nd round, but I think more likely he's a 3rd or 4th round pick. And the question there is, are you adding a guy just because he's a good edge rusher? Or are you adding a guy that has elite pass rush potential? And if you're just adding another good edge rusher, if you just added, let's say, a guy that performed the way Derick Hall did last year, which would be really good. But if you had 3 of those guys, is that enough? Or do you need to be taking some swings on a guy like Mike Green or a guy like Shamar Stewart or a guy like Mykel Williams who might be available, who have top edge rush ceilings? That's one of the things, I don't know. But I think David Walker, which is odd to me, that name. I went to a school with a guy named David Walker. His face keeps coming to my mind every time I say it. But David Walker is a name that screams Seahawks to me. Another guy here that we just talked about, Josiah Stewart. This guy is a ball of lightning. The issue with him is he's light. He is 245, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's really his more comfortable playing weights in the 230s. That does not fit Mike McDonald's scheme. But he wasn't at Michigan when Mike McDonald was there. He was at Coastal Carolina. But he's played at Michigan the last couple of years, and he's been a menace, an absolute menace. And if you look at win rate across FBS pass rushers, and let's put in FCS as well, and you limit it to guys that are going to be available in this draft or next year, because some of the juniors obviously are coming out this year, and we look at win rate. Who are the guys that had the top win rate in college last year at edge rush in those situations? Well, you're going to get some of the same names that we've been talking about. And it's really thinking right now, trying to carve up all these names. But that's where, for me, it will be really tough if Shamar Stewart somehow is sitting there at 18 and the Seahawks say, no, thank you. A lot of Seahawks fans have really regretted the Jared Verse thing and really wish the Seahawks had picked Jared Verse. For what it's worth, I think they made the right decision with Byron Murphy. I am not out on Byron Murphy even a little bit, but I understand it. Jared Verse, you guys know how much I love Jared Verse, and I get it. But if you pass on Shamar Stewart and he becomes an elite pass rusher, then that's pretty unacceptable to me. So if you look at who are the guys that had the top win rate, pass rush win rate, Josiah Stewart, 27.3%. And then Abdul Carter's down there at number 7, 23.3. James Pierce, who I like a lot, but is also little guy, 23%. Princely Umanamalian from Ole Miss, 22.7%. And then David Walker at 21%. Mike Green is at 20.8%. So he is similar to David Walker in that regard. But David Walker is a better body type for what the Seahawks want to do than Mike Green is, in my mind. So just something to kind of stow away. I'm going to see if we can find, where's Shamar Stewart in this? Does he count as, I assume they're counting him. Shamar Stewart had a 12.4% win rate, ranked 193rd. It's not great. It's not great. I'm just telling you, the tools that I saw were outstanding. And as you saw, Dane Brugler seemed to think the same way. I think when he gets to the combine, I think Shamar Stewart's going to end up being a top 10 pick. Definitely a top 15 pick, but we'll see. So what do you guys think? What do you guys think? I'm going to go here and check. I think we got a super chat here. Tony Bag of Donuts, good old Tony, has gifted 10 Hawk Blogger memberships. Appreciate you, Tony. Thank you for your generosity. If you get one of these free memberships, think about giving one. It's a way to keep things positive and bringing a lot of kind people into this community. Let's see. Derick Hall was comparable to Verse. There was a time this season where they were very similar, and then Verse went like this, and Hall went like this. So they are not comparable at this point, but they were at some point. Old School Seahawks says, grab your torches if you don't take Shamar Stewart. Yeah, I think that's probably right. Our favorite trolliest person, I don't know how to pronounce this, Nugash, I think. We have a good rotation, but we don't have an elite rusher. This is the thing, is like, we've got the Green Bay Packers receiver room as an edge rush group, right? Like, they've got a lot of number 2 receivers. They don't have a number 1. The Seahawks have a lot of number 2 edge rushers. They don't have a number 1. And if you heard Josh Jacobs go on a podcast and say, we need a number 1, a true number 1, Dontavian Wicks, one of their receivers, was like, whatever, dude, like, did not appreciate it. I don't think Josh Jacobs made any friends in the Packers receiver room, but he's not wrong. Like, that is almost to me an experiment of like, how good can the Packers be without a number 1 receiver? They were pretty good 2 years ago. They were okay last year. I don't know if they're good enough with the receiver group that they've got. And let me see what else. Got some people saying that Byron Murphy is a monster. Truth as we know it. He's what you need to win a Super Bowl. I agree. I promised you guys I'd do a Byron Murphy show. I haven't done it yet. I will get to that at some point. We've got a lot of days to cover this offseason. And then I got a comment here from Flag Sabbath. I don't think Stewart alone fixes the pass rush. I'm not sold. I think that's fair. I mean, Shamar Stewart, there's real questions. If he had his athletic ability and he had production, we wouldn't be having the conversation. It wouldn't even be that he could be possibly available to you. Similar to the way I was talking about Joe Milton. If Joe Milton had done it for 5 or 6 games, you probably couldn't get him. Or at least if you could, it would be a lot more expensive. So I think fans want the sure thing. When you're picking 18, you're not going to get the sure thing. And you're going to have to take some more risk. The reason the guy's available there is because there are questions. If he was a surefire, dominant blue chip, he'd be a top 10 player. So you have to bet on traits a little bit. You have to bet on your ability to get more out of him. So that's where I'm at with Stewart being a kind of an ideal pick at 18 because he has top 5 overall pick potential, but he has enough questions to potentially be available for you at 18. Spirit of Detroit podcast. What site is this coming from? The numbers in terms of, I'm not sure which ones you're talking about, but these are all the pass rush win rate numbers, the pressure numbers. These are all college PFF numbers. So if you don't know, PFF also has college tracking and has a lot of great numbers there. We got a question here from P Citizen Salt H, also a member, says, will Walter Nolan be there about 18? He definitely could be. My issue with Walter Nolan is I'm not positive he's the right body type to partner up with Byron Murphy and Leonard Williams. He's pretty slight. Now, it says he's over 300 pounds. He doesn't look it to me. So I'm just not totally sure, and I'm not sure how he's going to hold up against the run. So I've got some questions, but he's going to be a very effective pass rusher. I like Omar Norman Lott a little bit better as a pass rusher and a guy that probably can be had in day 2 as opposed to requiring a first-round pick. Let's see. Hawks fan Matt, man, good to hear from you, Hawk. Says, with the relative weakness in this draft class overall, do you expect a lot of first rounders may not be day one starters? Yeah, I do. I think almost anyone the Seahawks pick may not be a day one starter. Even like, let's imagine they get a Donovan Jackson. Let's imagine that they get a Gray Zabel. Let's imagine that they get a Kelvin Banks. Like, those guys could potentially be day one starters. They also could be what happened with Christian Haynes or some of these other guys where they have to work into it over time. So don't know, but I would not count on day one starter from the first round, especially where the Seahawks are picking this year. Question from Alan Carroll. Does Mike Macdonald need an elite edge rusher? Baltimore did great work without one in 2023. Agree. Well, we didn't get Kyle Van Noy or Jadeveon Clowney kind of production from our edge rushers this year. So I don't know if that means that these guys are not as good, if they're still developing, if Mike Macdonald had to do things differently with this group. But that's also a factor for me. Mike Macdonald has not necessarily prioritized edge rush in the past. Although if you look at a guy like Aiden Hutchinson, he certainly helped him blossom and get all the money that he got in the draft position he did. There's a question here from Jeremiah Smart. Is Shamar Stewart a Bruce Irvin type? No, actually not at all. Bruce Irvin was a great athlete, but a one-trick pony. He was a speed edge rusher. If he didn't get around the edge, he probably wasn't going to get to the quarterback. Shamar Stewart is a speed to power guy. He is a quickness guy. He is a counter move guy. He's got a lot more tools in his toolbox than Bruce Irvin, at least by my estimation. Now, I love Bruce, but there's a reason that Bruce Irvin became, more of an edge setting outside linebacker than a true pass rusher throughout his career. All right. Mr. Minor, 49er. We must hate if DK to trade him to Cleveland. We must hate DK to trade him to Cleveland. As far as I know, we're not trading him to Cleveland. But if you're talking about the possibility of going for Myles Garrett, I guess, I don't think there's hate anywhere involved, but I also think it's very, very unlikely. As I've said before, I don't think Myles Garrett has any interest in coming to Seattle. I think Myles Garrett would look at it. I think there's a lot of players that are probably like, I want to play in Washington with Jaden Daniels. That's my guess. And maybe there's some other guys that want to go to Buffalo, but I wouldn't bet against the Washington Commanders being the team that ends up with Myles Garrett. They have a lot of cap space. They have a lot of draft capital. And that would be a huge move for them to really vault. It's definitely better than anything that they could get in this draft. So don't be surprised if the Commanders are where Myles Garrett ends up. Let's see. Looking through. Yeah, I know people are talking about ESPN's redraft. We're not going to get into that, but so with that in mind, let's do a quick mock. And we'll wrap on that, because it's always fun to continue learning about these players and seeing where people can fall. I'm going to use the Pro Football Network's or actually, which is it? Mock Draft Simulator. We're going to use Pro Football Network. Yes. I kind of liked that one yesterday. Let's do a 7-round. I don't know if we've done a 7-round together. Let's do a quick 7-round mock, and we'll see what we end up with today with edge rush on our mind. All right. So here is the mock draft of the day. And actually, that's a great trade. right off the bat, but we'll come back to that. So the Seahawks are picking, and here we are at 18. And you've got Tyler Booker available. You've got Armand Membu's available. That to me is wild and not realistic. I would run to the table with Armand Membu if he was available. I think he's maybe the best lineman in this class. He's certainly in the conversation for it. Mike Green is available. Shamar Stewart is available. So you've got this opportunity to take a pass rusher in the first round. What we're going to do this time, we're not going to take one in the first round. We're going to take one later. Okay. So let's take a look at that trade offer. I liked this one from Houston. Let's see if we can move it down to 187. No, they didn't like that. Let's just take this. All right. I like this trade. So now you've added a second round pick and you're sitting there at 25. Who did they take at 18? They took Matthew Golden. Okay. Booker's gone. Derek Harmon's gone, but a lot of other guys are still available. So we talked about Nick Amanawori yesterday. Interesting safety fit for the Seahawks. Don't know that you go here in the first round. Membu's still sitting there. I just can't do it because it's just too obvious, guys. It's too easy. I mean, I almost feel like I got to do a different mock simulator because this is so unrealistic. Let's do this. Let's take, we're going to go a different route entirely just for the sake of keeping this somewhat realistic. We're going to take Colston Loveland, tight end. I've not taken him in a draft yet. I don't think Colston Loveland's a good fit for the Seahawks because I don't know that he's a good enough blocker for what they want to do, but he is, I think, a quality receiving tight end. So we're going to go tight end in the first round. Now, here we are. Well, this is interesting. Let's take a look here at who's available at 50. Jihad Campbell's available. Donovan Jackson's available. I just turned in the card for Donovan Jackson. Okay, we're not even going to look at anyone else. We're taking Donovan Jackson because we're coming up again here at 58. All right. And now you could start talking about edge rush if there's anyone that is particularly interesting. Kyle Kennard, I'm not a huge fan of. Darian Porter's available. I think he's an interesting name here. Omar Norman Lott, love him at this point in the draft. You could take a cornerback. But here's a name, David Walker. Do you take, the next pick is at 82. Do you risk that he's still available? I'm going to risk that he's still available. I'm going to take Donovan Ezeraku. Like, I like him, but I saw some reps that he just got. I don't know that I see the upside. I think David Walker is a more interesting prospect that you could potentially get later. So here you are with that extra pick. And we had a trade offer. No, I don't want it to go to 83. I'm going to do this. I'm going to take Darian Porter. I like that pick here and adding him as a corner to that room. I think that has a lot of upside. All right, so here we are at 82, and now there's David Walker. So what did I promise you? We're going to go edge rush. There's also Josiah Stewart. I like David Walker as a better fit. Omar Norman Lott's available. That is wild. But this is an edge rush. We're edge rush show, so we're going to go David Walker. I would 100% take Omar Norman Lott there, but we're not going to do it. We're going to take David Walker. And then we're going to go here all the way down into the end of the fourth round. And if you look at what we've picked so far, we've taken one of the better tight ends in the class. You've taken a great guard in Donovan Jackson. You've got, I think, maybe one of the best corners who I think is going to end up being close to a first-round pick. Definitely a high second after the combine. David Walker at edge. Now I think you could double up at edge. Jordan Birch is a guy I really like, but Jamari Caldwell is sitting there. I think he's great. I know from this sim I can get him later. Kyle McCord is there. Miles Frazier is there. Quite honestly, I think that's a steal at this point in the draft. but we're gonna do this. Is this really the best guys that are available? I feel like we're gonna go off my board more than this board because this board is a little crazy. As we're scrolling through here, yeah, Jordan Birch is a guy that is high on my list. I'm tempted to just double up on edge, which makes very little sense. But there's Jeffrey Bassa. So we're going to take Jeffrey Bassa as a linebacker. I think that's a great get here in the 4th round. And then we're going to see, hopefully, we get to this 5th round pick. And you've got Ozzie Trapillo, who I think is a great swing tackle prospect for you. I definitely would be comfortable taking him here. Unfortunately, we lost out on our defensive tackle. RJ Oben, another good edge player, could really just add all the edges. Baron Sorrell, who was voted best edge player by his teammates this in Senior Bowl week. CJ West is still available. I think I'm going to take Ozzie Trapillo. I like him as a swing tackle, and I think that's a good pick in the 5th round. Up here at 196, we've got a couple options. There's Josh Farmer from Florida State. Didn't love what I saw from him at the Senior Bowl. Wee Willie Lampkin, he's an interesting prospect. I'm just not sure I would go there here. Could talk myself into taking Jack Kaiser, honestly, at this point. I think he's an interesting linebacker. CJ West is a guy I like. Let's go ahead and take CJ West as a nose tackle. I think that would be a good add for your defense. And then we're getting down to our last 2 picks. Ooh, we're already at it. Pat Bryant at receiver. That's probably a turn in the card at this point for me. Who else? Tyler Shuck. Yes, Tyler Shuck. He is our quarterback of the future out here in the 6th round or whatever that is. And now here we are at final pick. Who is the final pick of this class? Oh, Olufemi Oladejo. For sure. I love what we saw from him. In the Senior Bowl. So we'll finish with edge. That makes sense in this situation. All right. So here is that class with a little bit of a touch of edge added to it. Colston Loveland, tight end from Michigan. Donovan Jackson, one of the most surefire guards in this class. Darian Porter, one of the highest upside corners in this class. 6'2", can run in the 4.2s. David Walker at edge from Central Arkansas. Jeffrey Bassa at linebacker. I think one of the best linebacker prospects in this class. Ozzie Trapillo, or Trapillo. I still have to double check that on pronunciation, but I think is a swing tackle guy that has a lot of prospects that could make sense as a zone blocking tackle, especially as athletic 6'8" guy. CJ West, fine place to take a nose tackle. Not a lot of pass rush, but could be really stout against the run. Tyler Shuck, quarterback who I think there's no way he'll be available that late, but has some interesting upside. And then Olufemi Oladejo, I think is a interesting edge player. So I feel like, yes, the actual way that draft fell is a little bit crazy, but there you go. And here's a good question from The Truth As We Know It. Don't we have to take O-line in the first round? No, not by my eval. Like, if there's a guy that's really worth that and that you think like is that great, then sure. If like the guys that I would say, if they're available in the first round at 18 and they fall to you, that you take them. I think Kelvin Banks is in that list. I think David Campbell. I think Campbell's in that list. Will Campbell, not David Campbell. Sorry, Will Campbell. Will Campbell's in that list. I think Armand Membu is in that list. Those are the three guys to me that you just walk the card in. There might be some people that have Tyler Booker on that. I'm not convinced of that still. But I like Donovan Jackson a lot. And I think the Seahawks just need to make sure that they're taking the best player and not just artificially pushing need up. They have to take a guard with one of their first two picks. That's my belief. I don't believe it has to be first. There's a question here from Hutch, says, what is the best draft site for getting accurate read on player values? What I'd say is there's not one right now. Until the combine, when they get measurements to where, and people are able to talk to scouts and everybody, player personnel, it's very inaccurate. If you look at January and pre-combine mock drafts and draft boards, they're all hilariously bad. The one we just did was pretty bad in terms of where some guys were ranked. So you can go to PFF, has their top 50, and Trevor Sikkema does a good job of updating it and his perspectives represented there. I would look out for Dane Brugler when he has his top 50. That's a good one to look at. I would look at Daniel Jeremiah. His top 50, which came out recently, is very good. And I'd look at there for the most likely to be decent perspective. Dane Brugler and Daniel Jeremiah are the two guys I'd probably put number one and number two in terms of where I'd look for that stuff. All right, folks. Well, that'll do it for another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings as we chase edges along with our coach. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give the show a like, click subscribe. If you didn't, give the show a like, click subscribe. We will get better along the way. And tomorrow we'll be back. Looking forward to having the continued conversation about what's going on with the team and continuing to dive into some of these players and what the Seahawks need to do to get out of this mediocre middle that they've been stuck in for so long. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day. I am Brian Emhauser. This has been episode 318 of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take care, y'all.